We are back in my sewing corner for today. I have a very fun, sort of different, sort of not that different if you've been here for years, project. A couple years ago at a per pound fabric sale, I picked up this very fun pastel floral denim that I think is oh so cute. And I've been thinking about doing a very, very girly Western set for a while with it, and today's the day. So this here is the fabric. While I was in New York, I picked up tons of trim and decorations. So we have a bunch of different types of fringes. I have some beaded fringe. I have some sparkly fringe. This is sequin fringe, which is actually quite nice. And then I also have some different trims, some star. I have just like a lot of good stuff here to create with. This is going to be a little less planned out for me and a little more experimental, which is what I really love about Western wear, is I feel like Western wear, you just kind of like vibe it out, and I really enjoy that. And then for the patterns, I'm going to use two here. I'm going to use this guy here, which is obviously a very Western type of piece. I'm only going to use the skirt pattern here, although it does have a pretty fun vest pattern. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do the vest if I'm feeling kind of extra. I'm mostly using the skirt pattern. I think I'm actually going to skip the buttons in the skirt pattern. My thought is some fringe around the yoke. Like, it has a lot of options in this pattern, and I feel like I recall this pattern being relatively affordable because it is, I would guess 80s. Does it say? Yeah, 1986. We're actually going with two 80s because I think 80s just naturally silhouette wise lends its wear to Western, and also it's so over the top in silhouette that I really enjoy that. For this guy we have, I'm going to be using the jacket. I have found from my thrift store buying, I really love an 80s, 90s Western style jacket. So I looked for something that I could Western up and found this little jacket right here that I think is super cute. Of course, here they have it not so Western and instead a little bit more preppy, but it has like the perfect lines for adding a lot of fringe, a lot of trim, a lot of good stuff. I'm just going to use the jacket pattern for this, and I find I really like how wide the sleeve is. I don't feel like constricted, or I guess restricted, both work, in this type of jacket. So I've been really enjoying that in the jackets that I have been picking up at the thrift store. I also think it sounds so funny, this jacket will be very versatile in my wardrobe because it'll have so many colors. So I think it will be really useful, and this time I'm not using, I guess I'm using plastic beaded fringe, but I'm trying some different fringes to see what I like wearing day to day, because I love the other Western jacket I made a couple years ago. The fringe on it's pretty heavy, so I'm hoping having the more sequin and then plastic based fringe is going to keep this a little bit lighter. I should probably tackle this jacket first, now that I think about it. I'm going to do jacket and then skirt. This is all going to be one video, so you'll get to see it. I actually really like the skirt pattern here. I'm just not going to use it today. That is what I'm up to. I'm excited. I haven't done this for a while, but Western wear is one of my favorite subgenres of, it's modern wear too, but vintage wear, and I love just kind of making things, and I love the glitz and the glamour. Like, I very much love like the Dolly Parton side of Western wear, so I'm excited to get this going. I have been thinking about this for years actually, and this is the year that I was like finally gonna just take it on and tackle it. So let's hop into the cutting. By the time patterns hit the 80s, I now have to cut them out, and there are multiple sizes printed on a sheet. This is always my least favorite part of anything. I love the fact that vintage patterns often you don't have to do this step, but here we are, and of course I chose a very high piece pattern with over 26 pieces, so we're gonna be here a while. Spooky has such a good time when I'm cutting, even though it is a very annoying time for me, so I'm constantly trying to play with her and distract her from being a hazard. I have started to cut things out more on the floor because I can get more support for my scissors. And this pattern was interesting because it did actually have a lot of pieces completely separate from one another, like the carriers. So there were a lot of different things to cut out, and I didn't read the instructions super well. So I ended up cutting out some wrong sizes of the single pieces, so like no big deal. Did take some extra effort here. And then once I have the gazillion pieces cut out, I can now lay them out on fabric and cut them onto my denim. This just felt like it took so long. This was a very involved cutting out process, which is never my favorite, but the pieces that you get from really involved cutting out processes are almost always worth it. So I'm trying to go into it with a good attitude, even though this was so much cutting out. It of course doesn't help that I did both the skirt and the jacket, although I only filmed me cutting out the jacket. Here is your reminder that I do have a Patreon where you can go over and support me monthly for access to videos on Mondays instead of Fridays. And then you can also support me one time by buying me a coffee on Ko-fi. I always really appreciate it. I think it's so cool that people want to support my work. And now we get started. The first thing that this pattern wants me to stitch is actually those little carriers. So I have 4 of these guys to stitch. Given the fact I have to put these in seams, I guess it makes sense that they're in there right off the bat. And then I am turning these out and pressing them. I forgot how annoying denim is to turn inside out. What an absolute nightmare. So this did take kind of a little bit of time because denim's just hard to manipulate. So this project is also going to involve a lot of top stitching. Normally you should get a top stitching thread. I did not for this project, so I'm just using a all-purpose thread, and I'm gonna do some pink top stitching, and my top stitching is always pretty egregious, which is why I don't do top stitching thread. Is I don't need it to be any thicker because I am a pretty crooked sewer. And we continued off with our strong start of having to put buttonholes in half of the carriers. So this was definitely an adventure right off the bat before I could even sew one other thing. But with the carriers done, I could finally pin them and sew my front bodice pieces together. The front is actually 3 panels, which is going to help give it a little bit more curve around the bust. Pinking this was the way I decided to go, and what a nightmare. Pinking shears and denim are not friends, let me tell you. So the pockets for this are really interesting because they're done kind of under the jacket. So here I'm putting in a little flap that I'm going to sew essentially a little rectangle into. And this is going to be the top of where you put your hand into instead of overlaying a pocket. You'll see what I mean in a second. Here you can see me actually flipping this out. This is essentially like that very top part of the pocket, much like you would have on the top of a front laying pocket, but instead it's in the back. This was a very different process for me, but honestly kind of fun because I've never done anything like it before. This jacket was full of a lot of firsts for me. And then here I am sewing the physical pocket to the back. That concludes the front without the yoke, so I'm now moving to the back. I have sewn the back centerpiece to the side back pieces, and here I am top stitching those seams down. This is kind of like a faux felted seam almost, although you know I've pinked them. So not really, but you know, sort of. And I can't quite put the yokes together until I decide how I'm going to trim this piece. So I have laid out all of the yokes and all of the other sewn pieces, and I'm gonna start playing with all of my buttons and all of my trims to decide exactly what it is that I want to do. This is where I landed for the moment with all of these really fun over the top trims. I was using 3 different trims on this piece, and then I took the week because this was my weekend. So I took the week, like the work week, to sit on my decisions and decide if this is what I really wanted. And I ended up nixing every trim except for the pink fringe trim because I wanted this piece to maintain some simplicity. I realized that it's a floral western fringe jacket, but I felt like it didn't need all these textures happening. So now that I'm back working on this after I've made this decision, I am sewing everything with the idea that the trim's actually going to sit on top, because what's also nice about that sequin trim, it's sort of like a rickrack that goes into a fringe, which means I can just completely top stitch the whole thing and I don't need to worry about sewing it into any of the seams. So here I am just pressing up the 5/8 seam allowance on the yoke to top stitch this on to the regular part of the bodice because I have to navigate the pocket here, which you can kind of see. So basically what has happened with all the pocket layers is I have that straight line and now I'm just pinning the yoke, and the goal of the yoke is for it to not sew the pocket closed. So we will be top stitching this and making sure I don't accidentally close this pocket. We have a quick spooky drive-by, or not so quick because she was giving a good stretch here, but here I am top stitching again for these pieces. And when I say top stitching, I am doing a top stitch 3/8 inch from the edge, and then again right pretty close to the edge, like less than 1/8 of an inch. So I am doing 2 rows of stitches every time I say I'm doing top stitching. I then sewed on that fringe off camera for the front, and now I am pinning the yokes together. I wanted to have the fringe on the front because I am not going to have it continue onto the sleeve, so I wanted to get that secured in the seams. With the shoulders together, I can now work on the collar. So here I am putting interfacing onto the collar. I always think it's a good idea to interface, even with something like denim. I just think it gives an extra stiffness and structure to a jacket that is really important for the longevity of the jacket. And after sewing this, I am going to press it. What you see me here is I'm doing these like rocking motions, and this just helps me get that seam out on a thicker seam. I have of course trimmed it and everything, but I'm trying to get a really nice looking, really professional looking press, and I found this to be a successful way for me. I do, now that I think about it, have a collar press tool. So I do need to pull that out and get that working sometime, because in theory that should do this without me having to do this weird rocking motion. But if you don't have a fancy tool, this is how I get my seams really, really crisp. Is you just kind of roll back and forth until the seam sits the way you want to do. It's like the way it stresses the fabric, it just makes it happen. I don't quite know how to explain it, but it works. I am now focusing on the facing, so I'm just giving myself a nice clean edge where the edge of the buttonholes are going to be on the facing. It's like a 1/4 turned over hem, and I'm stitching this guy from the top. And here I'm basting on the collar. So this pattern is super clear in that you're only to baste one side of the collar to the jacket, because eventually you're going to tuck stuff up into the collar. This is pretty common, although I will say I feel like I think of this as being an earlier decades thing rather than a later decades, but here we are. And then once the collar is basted on in the exact way the instructions tell me to, I can now pin on the facing. I am making sure to get my sequined fringe kind of out of the way. And then after sewing it, I'm going to take my pinking shears and I'm going to use that to clip my corners and just in general trim down these seams. I use my pinking shears here because I like that it doesn't leave a really clear line when you press things. Sometimes when you do with a denim, you could either grate it, but I just find in general pinking shears just don't leave as obvious of a line of where your fabric's extra thick. So I choose to do it this way because I think this is much easier than grading. However, again, pinking shears and denim are not friends. And then I am tacking on the facing onto the shoulders where it belongs, and then I'm going to sew up that neck as well. You can see I'm wearing it's like a palm thimble here. So I'm actually going to use my palm to shove the needle through. Trying to figure out how to do this without stressing out my hands, because for those of you who are new here or haven't heard, I have pretty severe hand pain and disabilities with my hands, and hand sewing denim is probably the exact opposite that any of my medical providers would recommend. So I was kind of throughout this project trying to figure out some different adaptive ways for me to be able to accomplish this project without really hurting myself. Also, it did finally have us sew the sleeves together, and the sleeves are actually going to open at the end because there'll be a cuff here. So I am pressing and kind of like sewing what they ask you to do with this. This was very interesting and a method I hadn't really done before, where there's kind of like some self-contained rolled hems that you actually cut into the seam allowance. Like the seam allowance here is cut wider than the seam allowance for the rest of the garment. And I just found this super interesting and a little bit different and kind of fun. And here I am going to actually top stitch the sleeves. I waited until I had done the weird cuff things because I figured I needed to know what the top stitching was doing there to make it match all the way up the arm. Not that any of it matters because it's all going to be covered with fringe. And then of course I am pinking it before pressing everything the direction it's supposed to be pressed in. I really appreciate how clear all these directions are on where you're pressing your seams to, because that's not always the case on these things, and I really appreciate it, especially for a jacket, which is a huge time investment piece. And after pressing them correctly, I am then top stitching them down. I think that's why this pattern's so specific. And here you can see me actually going to top stitch into the fringe. Very exciting. It's starting to look like a real jacket now. So I have been hand sewing away to get all of the sequin trim on the back. I've gone all the way around the bottom, now I'm going all the way around the top, and I figured this was the perfect time for me to on my mind. So let's chat through what I've watched recently. First couple were actually rewatches in honor of Devil Wears Prada 2. I watched the first one. Man, that was a bit of a rough ride. I forgot. And I mean, I didn't really forget. It is embedded in my brain that a size 6 was considered fat in the early 2000s. Like, I know it's supposed to be a witty joke about fashion, but given everything else going on in that time, it was a joke that wasn't really a joke. Overall, I didn't like any of the characters in the movie. I thought they were all bad. And I don't know if that was the point, but like I thought her boyfriend and her friends were crappy. I also thought she was not great. Although she learns and she grows in the movie, you know. But I enjoyed the performances. And the other thing is I thought the fashion in it was honestly pretty, like the fashion for the magazine when they were like doing photo shoots and stuff was pretty atrocious. But I thought the costuming was very fun. I guess I'm on an Anne Hathaway kick because then I got served Princess Diaries. So I rewatched Princess Diaries, and I will say that movie still works for me. It's a really great Disney film where it is a very different watch as an adult than as a child. And I feel like every time I rewatch it, I catch in on new innuendos and just kind of funny things. So it's always an enjoyable watch. I haven't rewatched it in probably a few years, so yeah, definitely enjoyed that. But that's kind of it on the movie front. On the documentary front, let's see, what have I been watching? I finally watched The Manosphere. I just didn't think it was that good. I was intrigued by the documentary, but at the end of the day, I felt like it platformed people who don't need more platform. I don't want to say like critical enough. I think it was plenty critical, but like, I guess if you're already familiar with what goes on in the manosphere, I didn't feel like I learned anything new, right? I mean, I maybe put like faces to the names that I've heard, but as someone who listens to podcasts about tech, specifically from like women's point of view, I was already pretty familiar of a lot of what has been going on in the manosphere. So I didn't find it particularly enlightening. I just found it rather maddening. Like, if you just want to learn more about it, I would just listen to There Are No Girls on the Internet regularly instead. I think her views are much more nuanced and interesting on the manosphere. I can't quite put my finger about what bothered me about this documentary, because I do think it's important to talk about these things, but it didn't work for me. I think one of the things is the man who was doing the documentary like kind of tried to like show that basically these guys are unable to have emotional vulnerability, or like that they're not whole people, which like, no shit, Sherlock. You don't become toxic in that way if you're comfortable with your feelings. And I felt like it kind of humanized them, and like, I don't know, someone who I would say has not had like the easiest go at life. Okay, you had a single mom, or your mom wasn't great. Like, grow up. It just didn't work for me at all. I thought it was far too sympathetic. I guess it's that like I just don't really care about what makes these men tick, because at the end of the day, it's just misogyny. So, and then as far as books, I've been in a rut. This is a pretty short one because, yes, as far as books, I've been in a rut because in the middle of reading a book, Libby pulled it back and my brain's so stuck in that book, I can't read another book. Let me see if I can find it. It was The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. When is it? Let's see. When does it say it's going to be ready for me? Oh, it says I still won't have it for 5 weeks. But yeah, I was reading The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. It's a fantasy, from what I can tell, kind of like vaguely set in Middle Eastern spaces. And I was loving it. I was enjoying it. I was reading it. It's kind of a long book, and it got pulled back before I had the chance to finish it, and I have been unable to pick up anything else since because I've been so sad about it. I just, actually, as we speak, I just approved a hold that was ready for me, so I will get back to reading because I can't go another 5 weeks without reading. That's crazy, because it's like definitely interrupting my bedtime routine. I read for usually 45 minutes before I go to bed, and I find it just really helps me get out of repetitive thought cycles. So not reading since that book got pulled from me has like gotten me a little anxious again. So I'm gonna get back to reading, and this was just like a good reminder that I need to be doing that. TV shows. I have been, since I haven't been reading, I have been binging TV. I have been binging 2 things. I think I'm up to season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I have never made it past actually season 3 before. I usually stop right at graduation, and that's just because like that's usually when I'm like no longer that interested in it. So we'll see if it makes it further this time, but it's just kind of a fun campy show. And because I can't find Charmed right now on any of my streaming services, I can't rewatch Charmed. Charmed is typically what I watch when I'm in that Buffy type of mood. So maybe I'll make it all the way through the end of Buffy this time. I've been really enjoying it. There's a lot of it that doesn't age well, but honestly, as far as things from that time, it doesn't age the worst either. So I've been enjoying that, and I think there was supposed to be a Buffy revamp and it got canceled, and I'm very sad about that. So the other thing I've been binging is Temptation Island. I only have Netflix for 1 more week because I rotate streaming services because I'm not willing to pay them all the time. I've been on Netflix for a couple months, so now I'll switch to something else. I have to decide what. I'm maybe leaning Apple TV. I've been binging, they have 2 seasons of Temptation Island. I think there's technically 10, and it's just moved around which network and which producer it is. So I can only speak to the ones on Netflix, but I've been really enjoying this reality dating series. The premise is couples who aren't working, that have been together fairly long term, go to the island where there's a bunch of singles to tempt them, and they, learn more about their relationship and all of that along the way. am surprised because it's not as hokey as I expected. I expected this show to not be very good, but I've been really enjoying it. So I finished season 2 first, and now I'm going back and watching season 1. And there's definitely a difference between the two. The most recent season, which is season 2, I really enjoyed the host. It seems like he genuinely like cares about these people being better people, which is, I know, very naive of me to buy for a second. Like, I understand how reality TV works, but it's kind of refreshing because it's like, this host clearly like believes in what he's doing, or he's a very good actor, I guess. Honestly, I thought all the people on the show showed growth, which is pretty unique when it comes to trash reality TV. And if you're looking for a trash TV to watch, especially in the Bachelorette's absence, I definitely recommend checking out Temptation Island, and I'm gonna see where else I can find the earlier seasons. It seems like it was revamped in the 2020s from the early 2000s, so I'm pretty curious what the format in the 2000s was. TV back then was so bad, like reality TV especially, and I'm curious. Otherwise, I feel like I've just been really busy. Work has been really, really busy for me, so I've been, I wouldn't say like working late, but definitely just like don't have as much free time as I usually do. So my plan right now is I want to get moving on with this a little bit and do some more hand sewing. I want to watch a movie tonight and finish my hand sewing while watching a movie. So my goal is just to get up through the arm here because I think the back is still going to be open enough for me to have access. It's just the sleeves I'm concerned about. So I'm just trying to sew through the sleeve point here. Then I'll close up the sleeves and start doing some of the other finishing work for this jacket. I need a break from hand sewing. I've been hand sewing now for 3 hours straight. My hands hurt, my body hurts, my head hurts. It's not great. Now that everything's just kind of hand sewn and figured out, I'm trying to make sure my collar lays really nice and flat, as well as all the facings. We're kind of getting towards the end of the stages where it's easier to press this. And of course, I'm getting all the sequins out of the way. Nothing misshapens your sequins quite like a lot of heat. So make sure to keep your sequins clear of the iron. I am turning my attention to the cuffs, and I am again adding that extra interfacing in. I am using one of Wall Wax interfacings. It's not too heavy, but it is just enough to add a little bit more stiffness. And then the instructions tell you to actually sew it together with one side of the cuff already pressed up, which I agree. This is always the easier method than doing this after you sew it together. And then I am, again, you guessed it, top stitching around the cuffs. So much top stitching in this project, but it's good practice, right? And here I'm actually top stitching basically the wrists down. I'm not doing any more hand sewing. My hands simply cannot take it. Okay, I guess I lied about absolutely no more hand sewing. Here, I believe I'm sewing in a few buttons. So we're getting our buttons on and all of those kind of finishing details, even though we're nowhere near done. I just wanted a break and doing something else, even though again, this was terrible for my hands and I should not have done this. I am voice recording this 3 weeks later and I can tell you my hands have still not recovered from this project. This was a terrible decision. You know, sometimes we just push ourselves a little bit above our limits. It happens. Here I am making the carriers, which is essentially basically like making a double fold bias tape. I was so nervous about my machine going through this, but let me tell you, my machine might not be the most expensive fancy pants thing on the market, but damn, she sews through denim just fine. This whole project, I got nervous and my machine didn't struggle at all with it. So you don't need thousands and thousands of dollars expensive sewing machine to do what you need it to do for garment making. You just need a good straight stitch and a machine that can handle some heavy duty stuff. I mean, seriously, look at her top stitch through 4 layers of denim. Doesn't even drop a stitch. Also, at this point, I begin to prep the hem of my jacket. I am just going to hem this. It's kind of like a really wide double fold hem. I'm only doing a little bit of the double fold, right? I don't need a whole lot of thick jacket at the bottom. And then here, I'm actually going to turn up the jacket by about an inch. This was all really straightforward. Honestly, this jacket was both more challenging and less challenging than I thought it would be. Now I get to start putting in my final buttonholes. Very exciting. It's really hard to try on a jacket without buttonholes, so this means we're getting pretty close. And I've also pinned the carriers where they go, and I'm now sewing through them. I would like to say my machine does a great job. 10 layers of denim, which is what we're looking at here. Pushing it a little bit, you know? I can't say she does that like butter, but she did the rest of it like butter. And for that, that's a win. And now I get to finally turn my attention here to the skirt. Starting with sewing in the pockets, I'm following the instructions, which is slightly different from the usual way I do pockets. But first I've just sewn them and I'm pressing everything open. And then I'll be pinning it together and all of that good stuff. And then in the millionth questionable choice of this project, I'm going to gather this denim. This denim is definitely a little thick to gather, but I made a decision and I'm sticking with it. And here I am gathering that to the yoke up at the top. This was not great to gather, however it could have been worse. I did not have any threads break, and that was a win for sure. And while I actually sewed these together the normal way, I am now pressed the yoke up. We're doing everything still with this double top stitching method to match the jacket. And I'm also pinking this and giving it a good press. And I'm interfacing the front part of this waistband. I'm actually going to put some elastic in the back, so I'm not going to interface that part. And I didn't know what I was doing, so I waited till the last second to interface, which is why you see me doing it. Like, so weird here. I'm also marking where my elastic goes here in the back. And then, like always, I am top stitching. I even top stitched over the elastic, which I ended up yanking out because the top stitching over the elastic made the elastic not as elasticy, therefore not as cinchy, which is what I really wanted from the elastic. So I actually pulled those out afterwards. And for the hem, I actually mirrored exactly what I did with the jacket. I did that first rollover, and then I'm doing an inch along the bottom. This, again, I think helps show that the set is like a true set. When you're kind of mixing and matching patterns this way, there's just some different tricks you can do to make sure they look related, which I know it's floral denim with pink fringe. It's not like it won't look related, but those extra details really matter, and is what I love about home sewing is how over the top kind of extra you can be in the way you do certain things. And because I put the closure on the back of this skirt, I am actually going to sew on a big skirt hook and eye essentially. And this is just because I find these more comfortable. If I have a button in the back and I sit down against a hard back chair, it is terribly uncomfortable and I'm not interested in that. And as if I hadn't already punished my hands enough, I am again sewing on even more fringe. You can actually see my pinky locking up in the back. Not great. I shouldn't have done this. This is something I definitely do not advocate for if you are disabled like I am. I pushed myself further than I should have, and like I said, I'm 3 weeks later and I'm still paying for this. So this was not worth it. I mean, I can't say it wasn't worth it, but I don't recommend this. And for my very last detail, I am of course sewing in my tag. I put way too much work into this to skip it. And with that, we are all ready for the reveal. So you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I always love this area and the roses. I think it's so, so, so pretty. But we're gonna go into my usual wrap-up trio. We have cost breakdown. Then we have final project thoughts. Last we have hope helps. And as a bonus / just real quick before we get into cost breakdown, because I know not everybody watches all the way through, I just want to note that I am moving here very soon. TBD if that changes any of my schedule plans. Right now it shouldn't, but that could change. But the real thing I wanted to pose is if there's anything that would be helpful for you guys moving content-wise, put it down below so I can consider it. I will already be in the process of moving by the time this video comes out, but I just want to get ideas from you guys and give you what you want content-wise as I move. But we're now gonna hop into cost breakdown. I have my trusty spreadsheet right here. This set, honestly, not too shabby. So fabric-wise, I spent $14.68. I bought this fabric by the pound at a resale, so this was secondhand fabric. It's always cheaper to buy secondhand fabric if you can find it. However, I will say fringe is always expensive. I have never seen fringe that's not expensive. I would be a little bit suspicious of fringe that's not expensive. And so my fringe cost $93.75, and then the rest of the notions, so the buttons, the labels, the thread, all of that good stuff cost $12.68, which brings me to a notions total of $104.19. So yeah, notions on this very expensive because fringe is expensive. And then the patterns, I did use 2 patterns from these. So in total, those patterns were $25. $144.29. So again, kind of expensive. Honestly, not too bad. I finally have been like diving more into the world of modern indie patterns, and indie patterns are really expensive, and they're justifiably so because they have good instructions, but I think I do like a vintage pattern a little bit better. That brings me to a supply total of $143.15, which all things considered for a matching denim fringe Western set doesn't feel too shabby. I think even just the jacket goes for this these days. Like, I don't see Western sets on the market usually, especially vintage ones, for anything less than $200. I'm really happy with what I spent on it. However, of course, we have to get down to the labor. Put a lot of work into this project, so I spent 3 hours and 15 minutes cutting it out. This is just because this jacket, literally the pattern had not just A to Z, so that's 26 pieces, right? It had A to Z, and then it had an additional, it had like A, X, I think is what it was, or Z. I can't remember. They had like afterwards, like, or maybe it was double A, but they had pattern pieces after. So this was a long cutout. Sewing, this was a lot of sewing because it was a lot of top stitching, right? Every seam I'm essentially sewing 3 times because of the top stitching. So that took 10 hours. Hand sewing wise, I did this to myself, but I wanted to hand sew on the fringe because I always think it looks better hand sewn. Plus, sequins are pretty infamous for breaking needles, and I just didn't want to deal with that on my machine. So I did spend 8 hours and 15 minutes on the hand sewing for this, which brings me to a labor total of $21.30, right? This is why Western sets are so expensive, is they are so much work. So like, I totally get why they're as expensive as they are, but it's why I side-eye anyone that's not. And of course, there are better ways at a factory to do what I did. You would definitely not be hand sewing, but it's just still so many pieces and so much time and so many details and notions and fabric and all of that good stuff. Here we talk about a living wage, so we're going with a living wage here in Seattle, which is where I live. This is not a one-to-one on factory. This is closer to a one-to-one if you were to hire a seamstress to make something like this for you, which you know most people don't do. But for me to recoup my time costs, I take that 21 hours and 30 minutes and multiply it by $51, which gives me the labor total of $1,096.50. A lot of labor costs here, right? We're talking almost 24 hours of work, which I think is going to probably have this be one of my most time-intensive projects this year. And that brings me to a grand total with supplies and labor of $1,239.65. Again, you see, which this is not akin to a really nice Western set, but you see really nice Western sets go for over $1,000. So I mean, that figure is staggering because that's wild. Also, like, the historically, Western sets have been quite expensive because they take so much labor, but that is the amount of money I would have to ask to be paid to recoup my labor and supply costs without even a built-in profit. This was a lot of work. Let's talk about the project. Let's bring her up. I have the skirt here. I guess let's talk about the skirt first. I really like this skirt pattern. I will definitely be using it again. I made it with I moved the buttons to a zipper in the back. I think I would do that in the future. I don't know that I think this skirt would look as good with a button. I will say I do think denim was a little bit heavy for this skirt pattern, but I do still really like this skirt. The one note I'll make is, if you see here, I needed to elastic this a lot more. This was like kind of falling down my waist all day long, which is an easy pattern problem to fix. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unpick to where I stopped the interfacing and then pull the elastic tighter, likely cut some elastic off, so that way it just really bunches in the back and pulls in the waist from the back. This is my first attempt at the method that I'm hoping will make my skirts overall more wearable, so it's not surprising it didn't go perfectly the first time. So yeah, I'm gonna have to redo that work, but given the fact that I didn't do any hand sewing here, I think that's fine, and I think that should be pretty easy. And better too big than too small. That's kind of where I've landed on skirts. I've made a few skirts too small and regretted it fairly instantly, and versus, like I said, with too big, I can fix that. For this guy here, super pretty, my jacket. I love this jacket. I will say the perk of using this sequin fringe over a beaded fringe, which is what I made with my last Western jacket, is this is much softer and easier to wear. Overall, I found this jacket like 6,000 times easier to wear than my other Western jacket, which I do still love that jacket. I still wear it all the time. However, I will say, if you're looking for kind of daily wear, you know, all of you other people out in the world who wear sparkle fringe on a daily basis, highly recommend going with this kind of, it's like a chain stitch sequin in fringe. And the other thing that I would note about this is it is pretty lightweight for fringe. So if you also needed something with a lighter weight fringe, I highly recommend. Also, you don't necessarily need a seam to apply it because it has this nice kind of rickrack pattern on the top. So I really liked this fringe. I will definitely use this fringe in future projects in different colors. So it's good to know. It's always helpful to figure out what works really well for like daily, again, me and my sequins fringe, but for daily wear. So if I can find this trim, I will link it for you down below. But yeah, definitely this worked great for me. I really, jacket wise, fit wise, I have no complaints. I love the little side carriers and the way it like cinches in the jacket. It's oh so 80s, and I absolutely adore that because I do love the 80s. Even though it was a confused time in fashion, it was also a very wonderful extra time in fashion. So of course I'm a fan. That brings us to our Hope Help segment, and today we are going to be talking about AI. Yes, what is hopeful about AI? It feels really terrible, especially for us creatives. It feels just kind of scary across the board. I think across the board, people are really angry about AI. Rightfully so, to be clear. There's all sorts of reasons. My biggest reasons is stealing from artists. I find that so upsetting because it's already so hard to eke out a living as an artist that we're basically pulling the rug out of our next generation of artists that we're already hanging on by a thread. So not a fan of that. I'm also not a fan of these data centers and the use of water and the pollution. Also, for me being data privacy, I don't like what AI is allowing on also further data exploitation, which is a huge problem here in the States. I mean, I think it's a huge problem across the world, but I know the States is a little bit unique in how there's no basically regulation on our data privacy. That's the doom and gloom side of it, right? I wanted to talk about what's making me feel hopeful about AI. And I want to be clear, this is not me going, woo, I love AI. This is me talking about kind of movements and progress and things that are happening in our government and like as well as like systems that makes me feel hopeful that this AI thing will die out or at least like go back to being what it should be, which is a tool for a very specific subset of people and not for the general consumer. First of all, I just want to talk about the across the board, across the US, bipartisan people. I can't speak as much to the politicians because they're a little bit more varied depending on how they are in corporate interests. But the people on the ground, your everyday people, everyone's against data centers. There's bipartisan protests being held, like where both Republican and Democrat people come out together to protest data centers. I think it's great that we have found something that actually is impacting us in these class wars as a just general working people that we can rally behind and unite behind bipartisanly, and that we can see through kind of the lies that are being told to us by the upper class to try to pit us against each other. So that gives me great hope that we're seeing movement, we're seeing bands, we're seeing all these great things that are supported just by everybody. It should be common sense, but you know, in this country, we can't count on common sense. So seeing common sense is very exciting. And I'm hoping that it will continue to have some dialogue around. Basically, we're all concerned about how expensive it is to live in this country, about how the quality of life is going down, about how our wages are stagnant. And I feel like this is tied to that conversation, but is a way that this conversation is being able to happen across party lines. So I feel very hopeful about that. And it also is bringing out a lot of grassroots organizing that is going to build people's muscles on organizing and protesting and things like that. So that is all very exciting to me. Another thing I wanted to talk about, these two are articles. I was trying to find if they were noted as opinion articles or not because I would kind of put them in the opinion category. But as somebody who works in tech, who understands how venture capital works, I just want to call out that AI is going to likely end up being more expensive than just paying workers. This has happened in fields where there are fields that they can fully automate everybody out of their job except for like some engineers and like robot fixers, but they don't because it's more expensive to invest in that technology than it is to exploit people. And yes, very dark for me to find hope in that. But right now, if you all remember when like DoorDash, Uber, yeah, we'll just go with DoorDash and Uber to start, were VC companies, so they're venture capital backed. At that point, they're just trying to get you hooked on their product. So they're basically giving it away for free and they're losing monies on the idea of profitability later. That is the stage of AI we're in right now. And like back then, everybody took an Uber, everybody DoorDashed, and it wasn't like this expensive thing because again, they just want to get you hooked on the product. We're in that phase of AI and it gives me hope that we're in that phase of AI because ultimately so many things enter this phase and then don't become profitable. And I feel hopeful that will be the case, that again, we'll see less AI in consumers. I can just say across the board, from what I'm seeing reported in my field, it does not seem like it is producing the return on investment everybody's expecting. So I feel good about the bubble popping. There is a chance this ages horribly. Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know what you want to call it, but AI is more expensive than paying humans probably long term. There's already been places where they have spent more on tokens to run their AI system than they would have if they just paid an actual person to do the work. So I suspect we're going to continue to hear more of that as these companies have to raise their prices to produce profits for their investors. I suspect that's going to help stop it from becoming as mainstream as it kind of is supposed to right now. Right now is that they're just trying to get you hooked time. So it's a great time to continue to resist generative AI, not get hooked, be used to writing your own grocery lists, all that good stuff, because eventually you will have to pay for it. And do you really have the extra money to pay for something that you've been doing by yourself for a very long time? I haven't talked much about AI on this channel, and I do want to kind of talk about it in general. Also, there have been, like I said, I have an article for this. AI is not producing the more productivity than the cost of it. I will never be using it on anything on this channel. In general, my view on generative AI is if you cannot be bothered to read it, draw it, make it, voice it, anything like that, then why should I bother to take the time to read it or consume it if you are not even going to be bothered to take the time to make it? I don't know why I would consume that. You will never see it on this channel. Again, I just don't think it is an actual consumer product. I think this is an enterprise product, which is basically when it's software as a service, companies buy goods and services from other companies. I think right now is just a weird time, but I do think the bubble will burst. I think we will all be able to go about with our normal life. I think it's something to side-eye and keep an eye on, but I do generally feel optimistic that AI is not going to work out long term due to all of these kind of factors I listed out. So it's a no-go for me, but I feel hopeful it is a stage we're in that we will get past. I mean, I do. I think it's going to be like Uber, DoorDash, back in the day, even Blue Apron, right? We used to have 12 gajillion companies doing this, and it was kind of talked about everywhere as this brand new service. And then these companies matured and they consolidated, and people don't use them exactly. They're available, I guess, if you really want it. We're not being forced to use Uber. And in this case, whereas Uber is different, Uber actually got rid of cab services, which is a problem for a whole different reason I'm not going to go into. AI isn't going to have that same thing is my thought, because it's not really replacing anything. Yeah, are there going to be people who use it for I hate seeing small businesses use AI. It bums me out. Literally, just do what we did and have done for all time. Go just steal random clip art from the internet. It is literally better for the artist for you to just steal a pixelated image than it is for you to use a bot that has been trained on their data and their work to then produce something unique for you. Please steal the old-fashioned way if that's what you're going to do as a small business. There are so many, again, machine learning based tools that don't use generative AI available that can help you make graphics that look good. You do not need to use generative AI. And also, this is me telling you all, not that you need my permission, but resist generative AI. You don't need it. I promise you don't need it. Write it out, have hope. Like I said, I have a huge amount of hope with the fact that there is a very real conversation bipartisanly happening about it that is specifically linked to cost of living and kind of this class warfare, right? We're being told by all these executives that AI is going to be good for us in the long term, and people aren't buying it, and I have so much hope in that. With that, I'm going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed. Again, this is my last reminder. I mean, I'll remind you 2 more videos, but I am moving. I would love to know what content would be helpful for you guys as I move. I'm so excited. I'm going to have my own sewing room. It's going to be a really, really good thing for me, because right now I live in my sewing studio, which is exhausting. And by that, I mean my living room and my sewing studio are the same room. So if I am sewing, I am living in it, and that puts limitations on my creativity across the board. So I'm super pumped, like I said, to just have a room where I can close the door and pretend it doesn't exist, while I can then just be a vegetable for a hot second. I feel the way it is right now, I feel just kind of mildly panicked at all times. So I'm so excited. So stay tuned for that content. I guess this is my plug to subscribe. And then, of course, you can support me by commenting down below, giving it a thumbs up, please. And then, as always, if you have the desire, which Like, I very transparently do not want you spending $5 to support my channel if you do not have those $5, which I'm sure you guys don't do that, but if you're tight on money, please don't financially support me. But if you're not, I really appreciate financial support. You can find me over on Patreon for monthly. You get access to videos on Monday instead of Friday. I also have a Ko-fi where you can buy me a one-time coffee. There are mixed perks that come with that. I usually put a lot of polls up on my Ko-fi, and sometimes if I really love a video, I'll drop it early for everybody who's ever given me money on Ko-fi. So I definitely appreciate that over there as well. And with that, I will see you guys next week. I am back for a closet clean out that I know some of you love, some of you will skip. It's okay either way, but stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for more sewing content as well as some moving content. So I will see you in a week. Bye.